Hello on-campus PCOR class. So this is to talk about our Monday's class 8 BP1 Telling the Story 3. So it was really good to get to hear a lot of your guys' different city design ideas. For those of you who I did not get to go sit in with your group and to hear which type of study design you would choose, you decided to send me your study design to look at. And the main question that I got from every group was asking me which design I would choose. Well, first, I'd like to tell you that the most popular study design chosen was the retrospective cohort. Most correctly stated that their rationale for choosing the retrospective cohort would be to establish some sort of temporal relationship in order to calculate incidence. Because the research question leads you to the idea that we're looking to study rates, so that would be a measure of incidence. The second most common study design chosen was probably case control study, and then one group decided to choose an ecologic study. The twist that they put on for their ecologic study was to collect longitudinal data, so data from as far back as they could go to establish the arsenic poisoning in the water wells, if they can get back as close to the 70s as possible, and then use records moving forward in time so that there was longitudinal data and possibly some sort of temporal relationship inference that could be made, even though they were to use ecological measures. I would probably use any one of those. Those are the top answer choices. I would maybe even do some sort of combination between a retrospective cohort and a prospective cohort. And one group actually decided this as well, where they said that retrospectively they would measure the exposure and group participants based on exposure status. So that's our whole definition of it being a cohort, and then follow forward in time to look up cases. So that means that they can go and even follow a couple years ahead to look at cases that might be developing. And that would be a really good study design. It would reduce time spent collecting data. It would be for the measures of frequency, you would be able to calculate incidence better than you would be able to calculate better than a case control study in which you cannot calculate incidence. And because it reduces the time of follow-up, it would also reduce cost. One group said that they would like to survey for the outcome, and I think I only saw one group that submitted that. So that's interesting, and it's not a bad take either, because there are inherent limitations for each study design, and one of the biggest limitations, in my opinion, for the retrospective study design is you having to rely on the secondary data that's collected. You have to rely on what is there and its accuracy. So how many of the possible cancer cases actually got to the hospital to be identified as a case? Some of you said you'd like to collect mortality data. How common is it for those mortality records to be very accurate? I don't know. I'm not a Bangladeshi expert, but those are some things that you should consider when you're doing a study or thinking about possibly doing a study in a resource poor area. The benefit of a case control study is when you ask about exposure, you can possibly ask more people, you can survey more people than those who just, and limiting it to those who just have records. So limiting it to those who just have records, you might be creating a selection bias, but the trade-off is if you survey a whole bunch of people to try to have a more representative group, you might be getting some sort of information bias because then you're going to have a recall bias. So you, the researcher, really get to decide how you want to weigh out your options. And that was more of the test for you guys talking about your study designs, was not picking the correct answer, but picking why you would you would choose that particular study design. So I think, oh, there was a question about conducting a randomized trial study. Conducting an experimental study, I would say, would not be an ethical choice for this. It would not be ethical to give different doses of arsenic. It also does not directly answer the research question. We wanted to know what was happening in Bangladesh, in the country as a whole. So we kind of wanted a very generalizable and representative sample. Experimental studies, so our randomized trials, we can't do those on hundreds of thousands of people, not even really hundreds of people. That'd be a pretty costly study. And to do the flip side measurement, so to do a trial where you're studying not getting cancer, so then you would study not having arsenic, that wouldn't really work too well either. Another group talked about randomization within sampling. So that's different. So we can do an observed study and not manipulate the exposure, but in our sampling strategy, we can randomize which towns or villages we choose. And that would be acceptable. Okay, well, good job in class, everyone.